You're listening to the Heart Lessons Podcast with me, Sarah Rieke. Real women, real stories, real faith. Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of the Heart Lessons Podcast. I'm your host, Sarah, and I'm so glad to have you joining me today. Today is Wednesday, March 6th, 2019, and you are listening to episode number 80. Well, it's a new month. Happy March, everyone. I hope you had a chance to listen to the Because He First Loved Us series last month, the month of February. And today kicks off our new heart focus that we'll have for the month of March, which will be loving our sisters well. I wanted to take this month to celebrate our female friendships and the wonderful women in our lives and focus a bit on some of the issues that often come up as we interact with our fellow sisters in Christ and our fellow women, because I know there are some unique issues as we think about the dynamic between, women to women. So today we're going to start our heart focus on this topic, the topic of envy, with Tilly Dillehay. Tilly wrote a book called Seeing Green, Don't Let Envy Color Your Joy. I personally know that envy is such a relevant topic when it comes to our female friendships. I've experienced it personally. It's something that I have to deal with and contend with. It's so hard not to desire the good things that we see in our friends' lives. Their looks, their abilities, their job, their finances, the way their kids behave. There's just so many things that other people have that it doesn't feel good when you realize that you don't have the same things. But Tilly is here to offer some incredibly insightful wisdom when it comes to the sin and struggle of envy. One thing that Tilly talks about that I personally just thought was really revolutionary, to my own heart. She talks about borrowed glory, and you'll hear that term a lot today. And it's this concept, this idea that everyone on earth possesses borrowed glories that are meant to reflect the full glory of the Father. And when we see some of these borrowed glories in another person that we don't have as much of in our own lives, then we feel envious. We begin to feel envious. I know this has been just such a good thought process for me as I kind of try to weed out these envious thoughts that I have in my own life that I'm sure you have as well. So I know that this is going to really help and change the way that you think about and view your fellow sisters in Christ. My prayer as you listen to this episode is that you will be able to identify what exactly you are envying in another woman so that you can confess it before the Father. And instead of feeling steeped and stuck in your envious thoughts, that you can move toward a relationship of praise, both praise and encouragement for that woman and praise to the God who created her. Before we jump into this episode with Tilly, I just want to say thank you all for 3 wonderful years here at Heart Lessons. Tomorrow marks the 3-year birthday for Heart Lessons. We launched it March 7th, 2016, and it has been just an incredible journey. I never would have gone on myself if I didn't really feel the Lord prodding me and pushing me in this direction. So it's been incredible. Someday, maybe I'll record an episode to tell you all of just, all of the ways that God has guided every step of the way. I think I mentioned earlier this year that there were so many times I thought I was supposed to quit, and yet here we are. Here we are, 3 years into it. 80 episodes. Today is our 80th episode. But really, if you look at iTunes, we have over 100 items available to listen to. Because there were some times when we did lighthearted episodes or a series that I didn't quite number the same. So there are well over 100 episodes available to listen to. Over 100 wonderful people, wonderful guests to encourage and inspire our lives through conversation, through sharing their own stories. So thank you for being here. Thank you to those of you who have been around since episode 1. And thank you to those of you who are just starting to download the episodes. I do this, number one, out of obedience to the Lord, but I do it for you. And my prayer is that you really are inspired, encouraged to walk well in your own story as you listen to the women who come on the show and share their own stories. So thank you for your reviews, for your ratings, for your emails, for your comments, for interacting with me on social media. You have kept me working and encouraged in this work that I feel like God called me to. So just thank you so very much. Happy birthday, Heart Lessons. All right, friends. Well, today I really am so excited to introduce you to my new friend, your new friend, Tilly Dillehay. Well, Tilly, welcome to the Heart Lessons podcast. I'm so glad to have you on the show today.
I'm so glad to be here.
And I know we were just chatting. I'm just thrilled to include this topic of envy in the month of loving our sisters well, because it comes up even when we don't want it to come up. We feel those feelings. So I'm excited to kind of dive into this topic with you today. But before we do that, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your family and all those great things?
Yeah, absolutely. So I live in Middle Tennessee in a very, very rural, small town. In fact, a month ago, my family and I just moved into a renovated log house that's 120 or something years old. So we were in a small town. Now we're outside of a small town on a sort of a back road that's got coyotes and hills and stuff. So we're really more country life than we've even had before. And I've been out here for 8 years now. So,
okay.
So my husband is a pastor in a church here in this town, and we have two little girls, a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, and I'm expecting our third in May. So,
congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah. I've written a book that just came out in September of this last year, and I'm also working on another book that I have to finish writing before this baby comes, because as I know, I will be unable to write anything for a good 6 months after my baby comes.
Yes.
Because it's not a good writing time. It's a good time, but it's not a good writing time. So.
Yeah, especially you're tired. I mean, I feel like just the fact that you're tired is a pretty big roadblock.
Yeah, it's an emotional effort, and it's a mental effort to write, and I want to be swallowed up in new baby time, because that's what that time's for. So
yes. Oh. Yeah. Do you know if your new baby's a boy or girl?
We don't, and we found out with the other two, but we are staunchly waiting to find out. So we're going to see what that's like. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's more patience than I've ever had. I could not wait.
I didn't think we'd make it, but we got past that middle ultrasound when you'd normally find out, and I think if we got past that, then we're probably going to make it.
Oh, that's funny. Well, good for you. Yeah. Well, I'm excited for you. That's very cool. And were your other babies spring babies?
They were actually. Well, I guess one was end of January, but spring was sort of on the way in Tennessee, and then a March baby. So yeah, I love having a spring baby. It's a good time.
I only had one in the late spring, early summer, and it makes such a difference than having winter babies.
Yeah. Yes, I know, because I don't know. I get more worried about sleep and stuff in the winter, and sickness and all that stuff. And in the spring, you can just. You're getting outside and strolling a little bit, and it really helps with postpartum. So.
It really does.
Yeah. So it's good.
Well, babies are so fun. I am excited for you.
Thank you.
All right. Well, as I said, we are going to be chatting about envy, and you wrote a beautiful book called Seeing Green, and I would just love to dive into that topic with you. And maybe can we start at the very beginning, kind of the basics? How would you define envy?
Yeah, so envy is a feeling of unhappiness at the blessing or fortune of other people. So envy is unhappy because somebody else is happy. And it's different from, sometimes we use the word jealousy sort of interchangeably with envy. They are different, and it's not a big deal because everyone sort of knows what we mean, but they're different. Jealousy is a feeling that something you have is being threatened. That's why it can sometimes be a righteous emotion. It's sometimes attributed to God in Scripture when He's jealous over His people's affections. If you were protecting, say, your relationship with your husband, it would be right for you to be jealous over him because it's right for you to protect that relationship. Whereas envy is fixated on something that belongs to somebody else, and it's taking it personally that God gave that thing to them and not to you. So,
yeah. And when you say feelings of unhappiness, like, can those range from, I mean, I can imagine it ranges from like disappointment all the way up to kind of angry rage even.
Yes, absolutely. In my experience, I've had sort of the full gamut of this emotion, and it can range from just, you're on your Instagram feed and you see a picture of someone's vacation and you sort of have that sort of, almost sarcastic little feeling of displeasure, and it passes as soon as the picture passes, ranging all the way up to someone who's in your life and is close to you, and things happen in their life that stir up envy that can last for years and years and years and interfere or wreck your relationship with them.
Yeah.
It can be a very obsessive thing with thoughts that go in circles for many, many years.
What does Scripture warn us will happen to our hearts if we make envy something that is our very close companion?
Well, Paul talks about envy in Romans 1, actually. It's in that sort of famous passage when he's describing what happens to what mankind looks like when we give up worshiping God and we begin to worship creation instead of God. And we become a society of people who are just idolaters. So he's sort of describing almost symptoms of what the core problem of idolatry, and envy is one of the first things he mentions in this list, along with murder, maliciousness, deceit, gossip, slander, disobedience to parents. There's just he's sort of sketching like this is what people look like. They're unable to love each other. They're sort of petty people. Everyone is sort of out for his own interests. And basically he's just saying this is what it looks like when the loves are disordered. When, you give up worshiping God, you're not going to be able to love people well either. So envy is definitely a sign of a heart that is not able to love well. It's just a stingy, sort of pride-ridden state to be in. And it's one of the things Jesus came to defeat on the cross. It's one of the things he intends to defeat in us. So I think, envy is like other sort of sins of the heart that we think are secret. They may hurt. It may hurt other people, and it often does, but it's going to hurt you first, and it's going to hurt you probably the most.
It's almost like, I feel like, talking it through with you, it's almost an entitlement. Like, they're not allowed to have that if I can't have that.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, there's definitely a feeling of like, if I don't have it, nobody should have it.
Yeah.
Envy really thinks that you ought to have everything that anyone else has.
Well, Tilly, as much as you're willing to, I know you said that you've had envy in your life, which I mean, we've all had it, but, and you said it has ranged from, just like little bad feelings scrolling through Instagram to something that can last for years. So as much as you're willing to, what has your personal journey been with the sin and struggle of envy?
Yeah, the only reason that I ever would have written a book about envy, such an unpleasant, topic, is that it has been a huge pattern of sin in my own life.
Yeah.
And part of the process of writing this book, which was written 5 or more years ago, actually, was just what the Lord used to sort of help me work through it in my own life and sort out some relationships that had been wrecked by it. The opening illustration in the book is about my sisters. I grew up in Nashville in a musical family. So my dad was in Christian music actually in the 80s and 90s. And he helped me to record a CD of jazz cover tunes when I was a teenager, because I was really, really into jazz music, and I had sort of this dream of being like the female Michael Bublé. So we did that, and then I went off to college that next year and just really got into the college life and didn't really pursue music with any kind of intentionality. And a few years after that, my sisters, there are 7 of us in the family, and mostly girls. And the two girls just below me had been working sort of in the privacy of their rooms. They had been writing and learning to play instruments and recording on this little 8-track recorder. And none of us had ever heard what they were working on because they were so shy they wouldn't even play it in front of us. But then one day they decided to do a coffee shop gig and kind of debut their music, and we all went to hear them. So I just have such a clear memory of that night in the coffee shop and stepping into the back of the room, and they strapped on their guitar and their ukulele, and one of them opened her mouth and started to sing, and then the other one opened her mouth and started to harmonize, and what came out was just everybody just stopped what they were doing, to listen. We're just struck silent. And I just, for the whole of their set that they did, I just sat there and tears were running down my cheeks. And I know that part of what I was feeling was just the natural response to good art. Music sort of produces emotion, but a big part of what I was feeling that night and for many years afterwards was just this kind of horror that this had arisen and very close to me. It sort of flowered close to me, and it wasn't mine. This beauty that they had made, and that from there they continued to work hard on their music, and they started a band with a couple of brothers. They went on the road and they recorded several CDs. So every time I had to sit there and listen to them play live or got another CD in my hand, I think it was even more painful, every time, because I wish that it would just go away and stop. And I was unable really to carry on the relationship. We had been very close when we were young. We were all homeschooled together, so we were in the home a lot, and I was very close to all my siblings, but I really pulled away from them. And I know that they knew that things were different between us. I don't know if they knew why, but it was only years later. We all got married within the same year, actually.
Oh, wow.
I got married, and then the two girls, about 6 months later, these two girls got married within a week of each other. Literally like one weekend, one wedding, and then the next weekend, the other wedding. And that was just, I know. But anyway, we're in each other's weddings. So we're standing up to sort of, share this moment in each other's weddings. And something about that experience of standing up in the wedding and realizing that we're strangers, like I don't know them at all anymore, really flipped a switch in me to just go home and say, okay, what is this what is happening here in my heart? What's gone on? And the word envy only really came into my awareness at about that time. That's when I ended up having to tell them, to confess to them the sin of envy and move forward from there. And the Lord has been so gracious to me in restoring those relationships. But, the time that was lost is not coming back. So,
Right.
Yeah.
I can imagine that was a very difficult conversation.
Yes. I've had to do this more than once, actually, with other people as well. And it's always the hardest conversation that you've ever had, But I've never ever confessed envy to anybody and been met with anything but open-armed, just graciousness and readiness to sort of move forward in the relationship. So,
Well, before we keep going, I just want to say, I know I read some parts of your book, and I just think that you were so honest, and also the glory of the Lord, so that we can look in our own hearts. But just thank you for that, because you could have been more vague, you could have been much less transparent and still got your message across, but you chose to lay it all out there, and again, now, verbally telling us. So thank you for that honesty. I appreciate that. I know it's not easy, but it is worth sharing, I think.
I just think it's difficult to get across what envy really feels like and what it sort of smells like without being fully honest about it.
Yeah. So. Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. So you said that it didn't not until you were in your sister's wedding, which I imagine was years after that first coffee shop experience, did you kind of realize that this was a problem. So what was the next step after? So then you confessed to them, but what was kind of your relationship with the Lord and your conversation with him like during that time as you were kind of trying to weed it out and sort through all of those feelings?
Yeah, well, I'd actually been converted in those years between that first coffee shop gig and when we all got married. So I was a relatively new believer, 1 or 2 years old. And I didn't immediately get to that conversation of having named it envy and to be able to confess it as that. And I think part of the way that I was able to communicate most clearly to them was as I started to write about envy, and I would send them everything that I was writing before anyone else read it, because I felt like it was so personal that I needed their permission, to share with anybody else. So I think that also helped to sort of fill in the details of what I meant when I talked about envy. But around the time that the envy became clear to me, I read an essay by C.S. Lewis called "The Weight of Glory," which is just a wonderful essay. I would recommend anybody to go and read that. It's totally unrelated to envy, actually, but in that essay, he talks about this appetite that we all have for glory, and this need that we have to be recognized by God himself. And he sketches out different ways that this desire and this longing sort of shows up in everybody's heart. And it's this secret thing. No one knows exactly how to describe it, but we all know that it's there. And something about his description of glory and of the fact that God was going to be, when we stand before him in the end of time, he's going to look on us either with warm approval and acceptance or disapproval, helped me, I guess, to understand, why is this envy so painful to me? Why does it feel like the girls and what they're doing, this beauty that they're creating is striking at the very heart of who I am? Like, it's threatening me personally for them to be doing well in this area. And why is that? Like, what is the desire of my heart that goes so deep that I feel like they're a threat to me just by being what they are? And that was the beginning of sort of the outline of the book, where I talk about 7 different types of personal glory that people wear, and what God intends to do with them, and just the underlying appetite that we have.
Yeah. And you also use the phrase borrowed glory, which I thought, to understand, like you said, you have to understand the root in order to weed out the sin of envy, or at least, I mean, you're not going to weed it out permanently, just to learn how to keep weeding it out. So can you talk about borrowed glory? And then we can, of course, go ahead and talk about those other 7 types, because I think they're all so important.
Yeah. So I guess at the beginning of the book, I opened by talking about glory and the fact that God has placed glory into all of his creation, into, nature, but even more strongly in the people that he's made in his image. And we react to the glory of God himself, because that, he's the definition of what glory means. But because he's placed these sort of little shards of glory in people, we also react to that glory when we when we encounter it in other people. And it's hard for us to ignore. And we might respond to it with admiration. We might respond to it with fear. We might respond to it with resentment and hatred. And that resentment and hatred, that response is just envy. That's what it is. So the borrowed glories, the 7 types of envy, are structured around 7 kinds of glory that I've just sort of observed in people that envy tends to follow. So these are they're borrowed because God has given us these glories, but He's given them to everybody across the board. People who know him and people who don't know him can still be glorious in these ways. And, they're just made to be reflections of his own glory. And he's given them to us, but he can take them away just as quickly as he gives them. So they're very temporary in a sense, in that they're for this life, and they may or may not follow us into the next life, just depending,
Yeah.
So these, for instance, the glory of the body, the first one that I talk about is borrowed dust, the envy of the body. And that's just what it sounds like, just envying beauty or health, or maybe the athletic talent that somebody has. It may seem like a really sort of shallow thing, but we can get very hung up on this. And I certainly, there's a long personal story about that in the book. And then another one would be money. We might envy somebody's money. And what we're really envying when we envy someone's money is the options that money gives them. It's not like we're in love with green pieces of paper. But yeah, but what it allows you to do is to put your kid in the school that you want to put them into, or go on whatever the vacation that you want to go on. But so that may also seem like a very shallow envy, but it can be a big deal to some of us, depending on what stage of life we're in, and just where we're at. And then another one would be envy of competence, when somebody seems to kind of have their life together and be able to accomplish a whole lot in a short amount of time. The envy of creative talent, the envy of personality, like someone who attracts other people with the charm that they've been given. The envy of intelligence. So that may matter more when we're in school, but for some people it matters for a lifetime, just depending on what field you're in professionally, or what circles you run in. And then the last one of the 7 is borrowed trinity, the envy of relationship. And this is, it's a very God-given desire that we have for relationship, and it can be very, very painful when we see other people in close, intimate, healthy relationship. And it's maybe a relationship that we didn't have or don't have in our own lives. Say they're close to their parents, or they have a good relationship with their kids, or their marriage is healthy. They're very good with female friendships, and we struggle with female friendships. So that, it's a palpable, it's one of the strong, I think it can be one of the strongest envies, because it's one of the strongest desires that we have. But I've been through several different rounds where it depends on what season of life I'm in and what I'm maybe valuing or pursuing in that season of life. When I was envying my sisters, I was ambitious to be in music. And so that was sort of the weak spot. Later on, I've dealt with envy of competence when I was sort of trying to become a faithful Christian, trying to be a grown up. And there was a friend who sort of had that figured out for a while, as far as just the sort of smoothness of her life went. Later on, I've had issues with envying women who are very good at carrying on their female friendships, because I felt like that's sort of an area of weakness. It sort of, you can hear it sort of depends on what you value, what you maybe have a little bit of, but you're watching for other people who have more of that glory. So one of the ways that we can sort of begin to diagnose envy is just to ask yourself, what are the glories that I kind of lead with? What is it that I have some of, that I maybe want to be known for? And what do I do when I encounter somebody who has more of that thing? Because there's always going to be somebody who has more of that thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the idea of like the borrowed glory, and you have talked about, like, God gives in little pieces what he possesses in, massive quantities. And so sometimes when we encounter glory, like you said, it can be like we can just be awestruck, especially I think of a musician or something, because that is not an area where I excel. But when you hear someone with an amazing voice and you just can't help but just, stare. And then when it crosses over, when you think, yeah, but now I need that. And that has to be mine too. And then that becomes a problem. It's like we can be awestruck for all of the borrowed glories. And then at some point it reaches like a threshold where it turns into a problem.
Yeah, it's sort of, I guess it has to cross the line into idolatry before you can really be envious of it. Because, the reason that God, just threw glory everywhere, basically, there's just all this beauty and glory that he's strewn across creation among people. We're supposed to look at that and see that and enjoy it and turn to him in praise and turn to him in worship over it. That's what it's made to do. But when we get where our eyes are so fixated by those little borrowed glories that we can't even see his anymore, we're bound to value them above what their actual value is. We're bound to be obsessed by them.
Yeah. Something else that you talk about that I think is it's a hard truth to face, but also really important to face it, is the truth that, like you said, God scattered his glory all across the world, but he didn't distribute it evenly. And so you call that the pain of inequality. And that is such an affront to our prideful natures, where we think, you don't tell me I'm not as smart as that person or as beautiful or as talented. That's hard to face, but it's really important to understand that. So can you talk about not just, I guess I kind of defined it quickly, but not just like what the pain of inequality is, but then how do we come to terms with that in light of God's word?
Yeah. That's the whole reason why envy happens at all, right? Because if it was all equality everywhere, then it would be much simpler. Right. But the painful thing we have to deal with is the fact that he did not distribute glory equally. We're not all identical. And I think we also live in a culture that we hate. I mean, we hate this naturally. Our hearts naturally hate this because we are obsessed with fairness. But we're in a culture that is also obsessed with fairness, I think, and that kind of wants to believe that everybody has a shot to be the same thing if they just try, believe in yourself and try hard enough, I guess. And it just it kills us to know deep down that that's not really true. But the thing that we have to realize in Christ is that in the new heavens and the new earth, we won't be identical people there either. We're not going to be just an army of men and women with the same gifts, the same faces, the same. We won't be the same. We're distinct, and that's one of the wonderful things about God and his creative capacity is that he's made all these people. But the thing that we begin to realize, I think, as Christians is that God has a different economy in mind than the one that we can see with our eyes and the one that the world values. So, Jesus told us that the last shall be first and the first shall be last. He's told us that it's the humble and the meek that will be valued in the long term, that will see God. And I don't know, there's something about beginning to understand the heart of Christ more and more over time. You begin to see that things are not always as they appear. And also, when you get lost in worshiping God, these inequalities become less and less significant to you, because you realize this is not where you're saving your money. Like this is not where you're storing up the wealth of your life. Right. Is in these little things. They're real glories. I don't want to pretend that they're not real, and that they're not that there's not real inequality between, say, a person who's a star track runner and somebody who is crippled. That's a real a real difference there, and it's a real imbalance, I would say, in this fallen world. But our eyes are on another time and another place, essentially, and Jesus has given us promises that we can cling to. So over time, I just think inequality. You cannot be in love with fairness and in love with Christ at the same time, because it's not what His world is about.
Yeah. And sometimes I'm not sure if this relates at all. Maybe it's kind of the opposite spectrum, but I also think there's a scripture that says, to whom much is given, much is required.
Yes.
So there might be people who have just heaps of this borrowed glory, but God gave it to them for a really specific and big purpose. And, if we all, like Scripture says, again, just keep running your own race, like keep running the race that God has set before you, and realize that He gave you what you needed to run your race well, and He gave this other person what they need to run their race well, and it's not the same race. It's the same race, I guess, capital R, but each of us is equipped for what God has written for each one of us. So,
yeah, that is so helpful. It's just so true that one of the ways we fight this sort of sidelong glance of envy is to put our eyes down on the ground where He has put us. He's given us kind of a row to hoe, and if we are working the ground that He's given us to work with all of our might, with all of our attention, we're not going to be casting our eyes over to the side and wondering, like, well, what did He, we're not going to be getting our fingers tangled up in their work, because He's given us something to do. He's, without question, He's given us something to do.
Yeah.
And we don't know anything about the true situation of a person who's been given heaps of glory. We don't know the difficulty of having to invest those talents. We don't know the pain and we just don't know anything about it. And He's given us what we need to know for our own job.
Yeah.
So that's really helpful.
As you have interacted with women on this subject, and considering like the 7 different types of envy that you outlined, what is the most common one that you have found to be the most common problem among women? And then how can a woman who is struggling with that work through it? How can you guide her along?
Well, when I was a younger woman, I think when I was around younger women, I noticed more of the body envy, I think, just as far as a pure surface level, like everyone struggles with this kind of a thing.
Yeah.
Because it just, I don't know, I guess it was just it's a big deal to us when we're young and we're strong and we're valuing that so much. But I've been surprised by the fact that with an older group of women, it doesn't seem like that is the first thing they think about. I think competence is probably the one that comes up more often. But it's between probably competence and relationship.
Okay.
Because, with competence, I do think that's really what our daily lives are all about. Sometimes it's just whether we're at home or whether we're in the workplace, we're just trying to get it all done. And we see, and we have a different sort of rubric for what it means to be doing well these days, I think, because now it's like it's possible for us to be homeschooling mothers who also know about internet marketing. Like we just, there's so many things that theoretically it would be possible for us to be doing all at once. And we can see other women online.
Right.
Or even just in our churches or in our circles, but we see other women who seem to be doing all these things at once. And it's just, I don't know. I just think we have a different set of expectations for ourselves than is probably healthy or was normal, 50, 100 years ago. But also I feel like I've seen a lot of the relationship as we get older, I feel like more of our relationships maybe are strengthening and growing, but also we see more fracturing in our relationships. As children grow up and decide to walk with the Lord or don't, or as friendships change, through the years, and as our marriages age a little bit. I don't know. I feel like one of the pains that we all experience at some point or another is this relational sort of pain. And we all have that one relationship or that one family that we can look at and say, but look how healthy and look how sweet they are. And because it's such a strong and God-given desire in us to have unbroken relationship in our lives, I think the pain is very, very much real. Also, female friendships. I've been amazed just in the last maybe 2 years. There was a point where I was suddenly really struck by just the thinness of my female relationships and just how I was conducting them on more of a shallow level, I think. And I was just amazed when I started talking about it a little more, asking about it and reading about it. I was like, do all adult women feel this way? And I just haven't heard about it until now. But it just seems like all women have this idea about the ultimate friendships that they should be a part of, and all with the sense that someone else is in that friendship and I'm not. And that's, I don't know. I'm not sure why. I don't hear men talking about this necessarily, but it's a strong issue for adult women for some reason. So,
I think it's also a season. Particular seasons are harder. Like, I just think the season that you and I are in with young kids who are still taking naps and need to go to bed at a certain time, you're not as free with your time. You just, it's just
in your
it's
mental
hard.
space.
Yes. Yes. And like at the end of the night when, maybe you could actually get out after the kids are in bed, but then you're just wiped. You're done.
Yeah.
So
I have thought that, and I've hoped that I wasn't just fooling myself about it.
I don't think so.
I guess the hope is in about 10 years, maybe we can renew some old acquaintance.
Or even you can be out later at friends' houses and your kids aren't going to melt down, like when they're 10, 12. Like
exactly.
It's just a lot different. So, and that's not to say that there aren't ups and downs in seasons, even when your kids are older, because then you're doing sports and, time is differently distributed. But I do think that, I think we have to give ourselves grace. Yeah, in this season, I think it's hard. Plus, introvert versus extrovert. When you're with little kids all day.
Yep. I assume you're an introvert just from me having mentioned it.
I think so. Yeah.
Yep.
I would say so. Sometimes it's hard, but and I also think too. I think a lot of movies and books and media, I guess, portray like the women friendship, like they're friends from next door neighbors as kids, and then they grow old together. And I just don't know that's a reality very often.
Yeah. A lot of the people you were friends with when you were a kid, it was just proximity. Like that's how you pick your friends when you're a kid. It's like, oh, you're a kid too, and you're in the room with me. Right. I guess we're friends.
Yeah.
And you just need I guess there are a different set of I guess standards or just reasons why you would want to befriend somebody as an adult.
Yeah. It does get a little more complicated. But for a woman who maybe maybe she's identified one of these envies, how can you help her get the work started to kind of bring it to light, or I don't want to say deal with it. That sounds so harsh, but work through it. There we go. Work through it.
Yeah, I mean, there's, depending on how far it's gone, there may be some serious hammering. That it may be a violent event when she has to turn on the envy. But so I would say one of the first things is just to begin to call the envy what it is before God. Begin to be in prayer about it, and begin praying for the person, the object of your envy. Pray for them. Thank God for the glory that He's given them, and begin to ask Him that He would give them even more of whatever the thing is. So whatever it is that's bothering your flesh, You can be actively praying that they would continue in it, that he would bless them. The way, pray for them, basically the way that you would pray for yourself, I guess. And that means looking at them as a whole person with, their spiritual good in mind as well. But it's not the time for you to be just praying that God would protect them from pride in their, which
Right.
is, we're so concerned about the pride of other people when we're envious of them. But, it's time to sort of get yourself onto their team. Another way is to start actively not turning your head away from the glory, because one of the things that we want to do when we start to feel this way is we want to avoid the person, or we want to avoid at least the part of their life that is bothersome to us in that way. So it's time to stop avoiding the glory and gaze fully on it, because you're trying to get to a point when you can feel pleasure from looking at that glory and not pain. And you're never going to get there if you avoid it. And then begin to praise them to their face, which is another it's sort of an exercise, but it's also a good sort of test for your hearts. See how hard it is for you to do that. Just letting them know that you see what God has done in their life, that you're praising God for it. And it may feel unnatural to you if it's not normally in your personality to praise people generally. You may feel like you're being sort of an insincere, like flatterer, especially if your heart has been struggling over the very thing you're talking about. But it's kind of hard to actively praise somebody in that way and also be unhappy about it at the same time. It's just, it's a trick for you. But, and then another thing, we talked about with the inequality, just kind of putting your head down and working hard in whatever God's given you to do. But diligence is a really great way, actually, of fighting envy, because envy is not naturally a productive emotion. It's naturally a destructive emotion. You would rather see something done away with altogether than to see somebody else enjoying it. So envy doesn't usually motivate us to just turn back to what we're supposed to be doing and do it to the glory of God. But that's a great way because there's just the satisfaction that you get knowing that you have done what God gave you to do. You can stand before him and say, this is what you gave me to do, and this is what I've been doing. And it may not be as shiny as whenever that thing is that your neighbor is involved in, but you know that you've done what he gave you to do. And it just knocks one of the legs out from under envy.
Yeah.
And then we can't talk about fighting envy without at least discussing what confession of envy might look like. Obviously, you're confessing to God as soon as you diagnose the envy, and you're confessing it as often as it crops up, as part of the sort of weed pulling that you've already talked about. But at some point, you're going to have to decide whether you need to confess envy to the object of your envy. And one question to ask yourself, just to sort of begin that decision-making process, is: would confession build a further rift between you, or would it help heal the relationship?
Yes, that's good.
Because it takes some real discernment. It's not, if we just brought every thought that we ever have to our mouths, it would be disastrous, So it's one of those thought life sins that takes some wisdom with confession. But one of the sort of questions also is just: how close have you been to the person? Are they a coworker? They're a few cubicles down maybe, and all you know about them is that they're wonderful and the boss loves them and they do everything better than you. They may not even know your last name. It's possible that your first move of intimacy towards them shouldn't be to sit down and say,
right,
confess your hate-filled heart.
That's funny.
Yeah. But, on the other end, it could be a friend that you've had for many years, or someone in your church who is always going to be in your circle whether you like it or not. And they've noticed, that there's coldness between you, or like in the case of my sisters, I wasn't going to, we're always going to be in the same family. So praise the Lord for that, because I probably would have gotten out of the relationship if I could have. But they knew, and a lot of the time I find that people know something's off. They just don't necessarily know what it is until you tell them.
Right.
But in that case, if it's a relationship that's really been broken, an intimacy that's been lost over the envy, there may be only one way of moving forward, and it may be to confess to them.
Yeah.
And it's very difficult.
Yeah, but those are some very good tools for discerning, and just the simple idea, like would it help a relationship or hurt it? Mm-hmm. And that's not to say that it won't be awkward either way.
Exactly.
But
yeah,
that is a great place to start. Well, Tilly, you told us that you have 2 young daughters, and how does your experience with envy and knowing what you know about that, how does that change how you raise your daughters today, or does it?
That's such a great question. No one's ever asked me that question before. I definitely think about it. I especially think about it as they enter adolescence, and then, I guess I'll be thinking too as they enter their teens, especially. But right now, the understanding of inequality, I think, plays a part even from the very earliest age, because these are 2 little girls. They're very different from each other, as all little children are. They show from such an early age that they're just totally different people.
Yeah.
So one of them talks really early, the other one doesn't. One of them is loud and outgoing, the other one is quiet, that kind of thing. And if I think there's an impulse in our hearts that wants to sort of smooth over the inequalities that we see in those that are close to us, that we care about. We want to, we really would love it if people were equal, even around us, because it would make things a lot easier and simpler. But I just, from an early age, I want it to be built into their worldview from the way that I talk about these things. I want it to be built into their minds that God has made us differently, and we don't have to pretend that that's not true, because He's done it on purpose. It's not an accident, and what He intends to do with it is really His business, and not really ours. So. Yeah, I don't want to be a mom who is constantly trying to smooth over the differences that I see in the children, and any more than I want to be a mom who's preferring one all the time, and showing like clear partiality towards one of the kids. But as they get older, I know that envy will be. It will be a factor in their relationships with each other, especially if it's, the more I know what it's like to grow up in a girl house.
Right.
And I just, your peer relationships, the people who you're sort of comparing yourself to first, that's where envy crops up most naturally, is with, with your peers. So your siblings are definitely, that's one of the first places, but that means that's a training ground. That's a place where they can learn to rejoice with others who rejoice, and learn to mourn with those who mourn, and learn to just enjoy the fact that God has made people differently.
Yeah. So what do you do then? I don't know that this is particularly an example for your home, but if, one of your daughters if you're coloring and one looks at the other and says, oh, her picture looks better than mine, how would you handle that situation?
I guess I wouldn't have a big problem saying, oh yes, that is, she is a really good artist, isn't she? And just being willing to acknowledge and call out a particular gifting in one child, and then knowing that there will be a different gifting in the other child. That's just, I don't know, that's the way that I've seen it, is with variety, you get all these delightful differences,
Yeah.
So I don't know. I don't have a problem with acknowledging that one child has done better in this thing than the other child. just like I don't have a problem with grades. I don't have a problem with giving an A to someone who has earned an A. But I know that in the school years, this will also crop up, because somebody's going to be a more natural student than others. So I know that'll happen.
Certainly, though, you don't want to compare as a mom. That could be dangerous. So what's that line?
Yeah, exactly. It's not like you want to. Well, that's the thing is your kids know. I think they instinctively know what your values are. So like if you were a mom who is obsessed with, say, body image, and your comment about everybody after you meet them is whether they're attractive, whether they've lost weight, whether, your kids pick this up and they know, like, this is the value system. And this is, if I'm going to measure up for my mom, this is what I need to do. So just if you have a tendency to value something more than you ought to, whether it's academics or whatever, they're going to know that. So being able to acknowledge that somebody wrote a better paper than someone else, or someone's better than math than somebody else, it's easier to do that if you're not making that thing the ultimate value. If they're not seeing you say, not only is this kid better at school, but school is the most important thing. This is how this is where we hang our value.
Right.
That is going to translate, and that's going to be a huge problem. But if you are loving the Lord, if you are just orienting your home around worship of God and the fact that He makes us all different, and He intends worship to come out of each of us. Basically, that's what we're made for. Then the various things your kids might be good at or bad at, it's just not as important. And you want them to see that. Yeah,
that's good. In our house, I have boy, girl, boy. So I don't actually have a double girl dynamic, but I have an 8, 4, and 2-year-old. And I feel like where their comparison or envy or what have you comes in is like, well, he's faster. I'm like, well, yes, but he's 4 years older than you. Or, so it's like I tried to tell each one, or, he's taller, she's bigger. She can sit in that car seat and I'm too small for that car seat. And I always try to say, it's true, but you'll get there one day. But right now you're the best size for yourself. I always just try, you're the perfect size for you right now.
Exactly. Yeah. That's fun. I mean, it also just, it's a boy and a girl, and what fun to begin to celebrate among your kids the difference in the genders, and just how, I just think it's so fun. I would love to have boys and girls in the house, maybe, and just celebrate and enjoy how God makes us different.
Yeah.
Because I think that's fun.
It's very fun. Well, Tilly, using all that you know about envy and just your heart for fighting against it and helping all of us do that really well, I would love if you would fill the blank, finish off this sentence. I can love my sisters in Christ well by.
I would say in the long term, I can love my sisters in Christ well by feeding my affections for Christ. Because a heart that is full on Christ becomes a heart that can rejoice to see other people full.
Oh, wow.
It's not a stingy heart when we've had this kind of love sort of poured into us. This is the love that we see described in 1 Corinthians 13, love that doesn't envy, that doesn't boast. We're full of what only Christ is able to give us. And when you have that kind of overflowing bounty, you're not looking to see, did somebody else get more?
Right.
And you're able to, that love is kind of flowing out on other people. It's a stingy heart that feels lack, that looks and begrudges other people's fullness.
Yeah. Yeah. Like you feel threatened that what you have isn't enough or isn't adequate. You need more, and you need that person's.
Yes. So if you're feeding and you're gorging yourself on Christ himself, that's where that fullness comes from.
That's very good. Well, Tilly, as we finish out this podcast episode, there's 2 questions I ask every guest. And the first one is, as you're walking out the story God has written for you, what is a heart lesson he's been reminding you of lately?
Well, I would say just that the fullness that Christ provides has been one of the big things in my heart lately. He's reminding me that He is what my heart desires. We're enjoying this really quiet country life this winter. But there's been something about leaning into these commitments here in my little world. Really, it's a little sphere that I'm in right now, and just practicing faithfulness here in this little sphere. But He's given me such a sweet fulfillment in knowing, wanting to know Him better in this season. And it just feels like He's showing Himself to me in His Word and in these very sort of ordinary ways that He's been revealing Himself to Christians for thousands of years,
Yeah.
So it's just the sort of normal Christian walk things where He's making Himself sweet to me.
All right. Well, this is the last question, just for fun. What is something you are looking forward to?
Well, I'm looking forward to getting this baby out and getting this book out.
Yes.
So at about the same time.
Oh man.
Yeah. It's my husband and I were joking last year. We need to decide between either another baby or another book, and it seems like the Lord just decided we were going to do both of those things. So,
that's funny. So how much more time do you have?
I guess I have about 3 months left.
Okay.
On both.
Are you still feeling pretty good?
I am. It was a
good.
hard first trimester this pregnancy, where others haven't been, but it's been great, and this is since the second trimester hit. So
that's good.
We're just counting it down now.
Yes. Oh well, that's so fun, Tilly. This has been such a great conversation, and just so life-giving, honestly, because as I was reading through your book and just talking to you this morning, I feel like there are places where I feel envy that I haven't identified. And so just to kind of take a step back and think about the whole idea of like borrowed glory and what am I seeing in somebody that I'm actually craving to worship in the Lord. And just all those things has been helpful to my heart. I know it's going to be helpful to anyone who's listening. Can you tell us where we can find you on social media and stay connected with you and just hear more about your heart and all these wonderful things?
Yeah, well, I'm on Facebook. I have an author page on Facebook that's Tilly Dillehay, and I think my Instagram handle is also Tilly Dillehay.
Okay.
And my husband and I blog at justinandtilly.com.
Okay.
So his name is Justin, mine is Tilly. That should be easy. And then the book is on Amazon, and occasionally you'll see articles on the Gospel Coalition by either myself or Justin. So
okay. And then your new one, I mean, I know it takes forever for books to come out, so you're turning in the manuscript shortly, but it won't come out.
It'll be spring it'll be next year, probably in the spring or the summer. And this one will be about food. It'll be about sort of eating and hospitality to the glory of God.
Okay.
So I'm excited about that one.
That's great. That's another topic that we as women could definitely benefit from.
That's sure. A very woman type of
Oh,
question.
Very good. All right, Tilly. Well, thank you again for chatting with me, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
I've enjoyed it so much. Thank you, Sarah.
I don't know about you, but that episode gave me so much to think on. I feel like Tilly approached the topic of envy in a way that I've never really heard before. And just, again, that idea of borrowed glory, it's just been revolutionary to my heart and my mind as I just try to think about where envy is kind of coloring my relationships with other women in a bad way. So it's really something I'm so thankful to have been introduced to through Tilly and her story and in the ministry that she has. So often when I'm starting to kind of feel those envious thoughts creep up, I stop and ask myself, what is it that I'm recognizing in this other person that should actually make me turn in praise towards the Lord? And that's really changed my heart to think about that borrowed glory. What borrowed glory am I seeing in them that instead of feeling envious about it should just make me turn and praise God that He is allowing some of His glory to be sprinkled here on earth and just to catch a glimpse of what His fullness is actually like. So I hope that was a really helpful picture and something that can help you as well as you try to weed out some envy in your own life. Well, as I mentioned in our intro, tomorrow Heart Lessons turns 3. A great birthday gift, if you are looking to give a gift to the podcast, would be to leave a rating or a review. It really is just somehow the algorithms are all figured out over there on iTunes that the more ratings and reviews, the more frequently other people can find the show. It just kind of pops up as a suggestion. So that would be a great way to celebrate Heart Lessons if you feel so inclined. Also, Friday is the International Day of the Woman. And I didn't realize when I set up this heart focus, but it feels really appropriate here this month when we are talking all about how to love our sisters well. I think it's just really fitting that it's also the month that we celebrate other women. So I just want to say that I celebrate you. I think most of our listeners are women, so I just want to tell you that I celebrate you and all that God is doing in your life. You are awesome, sister, so just keep running your race. Also, Friday is my dad's birthday, so happy birthday to my dad. Okay, something to keep in mind this spring is that my book, Even Broken Can Be Beautiful, A Story of Life, Loss, and the Hope of Heaven, will be releasing in May. May 21st is what I am aiming for. So find me over on Instagram, Sarah_Rieke, that's Rieke, or visit me at sarahrieke.com to stay up to date with info on the book and when that will be available. It is a self-published endeavor, so I really am not sure what all of that is going to look like, when it will be available for pre-orders or anything like that, but I will, as soon as I find things out, I will let you all know. Next week, we'll continue our Loving Our Sisters Well heart focus with Dorena Williamson. She is going to come on and talk to us about how we can love our sisters well who are different from us. We talk about all sorts of differences that can come up in our relationships with other women, age, race, work schedules, and so much more. So make sure that you're subscribed to the podcast so that episode will download right to your device. Okay, friends, well, that is all from me for today. Thank you again for being here, for tuning into Heart Lessons. And as always, I hope you found this episode to be inspiring and encouraging to help you walk well in the story that God is writing, especially for you. Bye, guys.